Before September 11th, the top domestic terror threat listed by the FBI was the Earth Liberation Front, or E.L.F. The loosely affiliated group is responsible for sabotaging companies it believes are harming the environment. E.L.F. operatives carried out dozens of attacks over the years, but have only destroyed property. They took steps to make sure they never injured or killed people. In 2005, investigators arrested several members of a cell based in the Northwest. What happened next is the basis for the new POV documentary, If a Tree Falls, a story of the Earth Liberation Front. This morning, we're joined by the film's director, Marshall Curry. Marshall, good to see you. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of all things to do a documentary on, why the Earth Liberation Front?
Well, this one really dropped in my lap. My wife runs a domestic violence organization in Brooklyn, and she came home from work one day and told me that 4 federal agents had walked into her office that day and arrested one of her employees. And it was this guy, Daniel McGowan, who was working for her, and he faced life in prison, no parole, if he was found guilty of these crimes that the government considered to be terrorism.
And Danny McGowan, actually the person that is the main character in the documentary. And so you finally catch up and you talk to all the members of the E.L.F. Was there any moment or anything in particular that struck you once you started to meet these people?
Yeah, I mean, the whole process of making this film was kind of a journey for me and Sam Coleman, who's the co-director on the project. We, you know, person after person that we met stretched our expectations. I mean, you know, the E.L.F. members turned out to be much more articulate and thoughtful than I'd expected. And then we spent time with the prosecutor and with the detective on the case and with the arson victims. And each time that we talked to somebody, we had our point of view stretched. And so that's really how we've tried to build the film, is to take the audience on that same journey.
When you started this, did you have a certain expectation of what these characters would be like?
You know, I was a little bit familiar with the Earth Liberation Front just from having seen television stories. I mean, they had done these multi-million-dollar arsons of meat-packing plants and timber companies, and probably the most famous was the one at Vail, Colorado, where they attacked the ski resort for trying to expand into national forest. But I really didn't know much about them, and so it was kind of a blank slate in a lot of ways.
When you learned and you finally understood what these characters were and what this film was developing into, did you have to change how you put it together based on the enlightenment that you had when you talked to them?
Definitely. I mean, the film is not a polemical film. It's a film that asks a lot more questions than it answers. And somebody even said to me the other day, Marshall, your film is a film that lets audiences chew their own food. You don't chew the food for them. We leave questions unanswered and let kind of strong arguments from E.L.F. members, from the arson victims, from the prosecutors, all kind of bang into each other and let the sparks fly.
And so much has been made of what these E.L.F. members have done, what they had actually done, the crimes that they committed. And it's no doubt they certainly were violent. But do you believe that these were acts of terrorism?
Well, they would argue that they're not even violent. I mean, in their minds, it is property destruction. No one's ever been hurt in an E.L.F. action. And you know, they say that it's like the Boston Tea Party. Right. It's symbolic property destruction. Of course, when you talk to the arson victims, whose businesses were destroyed, who had no idea if maybe their homes were going to be next, they certainly felt fear and intimidation. And in their minds, that's the essence of terrorism.
What did you think? Did it change as you started making the film?
You know, I studied religion when I was in college. I was a comparative religion major and really wanted to figure out if there was a God and how we should live our lives. And when I was graduating, one of my friends said to me, you know, after 4 years of studying this, I'm still confused, but just at a higher level. And in a way, that's how I sort of feel. I think this question of terrorism and activism and all of that are complicated questions, honestly.
So with that said, for somebody that sits down and watches this documentary for an hour and a half, what do you expect them to take away?
I hope that what they'll take away is an enlightened confusion, perhaps, a sense of the ambiguity
right.
of these situations. I mean, the police captain on the case kind of sums up the terrorism question really well. He says, you know, and this is a guy who has spent years of his life trying to catch the members of the E.L.F., and he says, you know, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. A lot of it depends on how you feel about what they're going after. And in his mind, the question is crime and not crime. But that the word, you know, arson is clearly a crime, and people who commit arson should be caught and put in jail. But you know, to talk about it as terrorism or not terrorism, maybe that creates more heat than light and doesn't actually illuminate the situation. It just sort of gets people whipped up into frenzies.
Marshall Curry, appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you. I'm really happy to have been here.
If a Tree Falls, a story of the Earth Liberation Front, premieres tonight. PBS, 10 o'clock. Be sure to check your local listings. Also available to stream on POV's website.
Of the arson. They put on their masks and then placed the 5-gallon fuel containers and activated the timing devices.
911, where is your emergency?
The Earth Liberation Front is turning up the heat again, igniting devastating blazes all across the country.
Fire bombings included attacks on lumber mills, wild horse corrals, and meatpacking plants.
This investigation is the largest domestic terrorism case in the history of the United States.
Sometimes when you see things you love being destroyed, you just want to destroy those things. I was like, man, this is butchered. It made me think, like, why are we being so gentle?
The goal is to just send a message that consumer America is destroying the world.
When the big bad bully gets hit in the stomach and feels a little fear, that felt good.
After the fire, you really looked over your shoulder.
People go home at night wondering if they're going to be a target. That's what terrorism is.
Eco-terrorism.
Eco-terrorist.
Eco-terrorism.
Environmental terrorism.
The police were amping up their presence, and people's views got hardened.
This is what we want you to do. We want you to wear a wire.
You don't have to be Bonnie and Clyde to be a bank robber, and you don't have to be Al-Qaeda to be a terrorist.
No one got hurt, no one was injured, and yet I'm facing life plus 335 years. I'm not suggesting that the path of destruction is the right path. When you're screaming at the top of your lungs and no one hears you, what are you supposed to do?
The old adage that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter is true.